Hi, everyone. I'm Will Allred. If you may or may not know, I'm one of the co-founders at Lavender. I'm sitting down today with Sam Tuke over at Lightmeter. As a founder in
Hey,
the
Will.
hey, hey, as a founder in the email space, one of the things that comes up often, and it's something that we don't necessarily solve for, is this idea of deliverability. And so I get asked about it a lot. I get asked for recommendations a lot, and someone within my network pointed me to Sam because of what Sam's building. And so instead of butchering some introduction about Sam, I figured I would let Sam take the mic and then I'll ask some questions to him on deliverability, and we can start a little quick convo and hopefully everybody can learn from it. Sam?
Awesome.
I think it'd be helpful for folks to get to know what you're building, but also your background. How'd you get here?
Sure. So what we have now is what we think of as like a SendGrid for salespeople. We're delivering sales email as a service, and we connect to those tools which you also support at Lavender, like Outreach and HubSpot and Salesforce. And that's all we do. So we're super focused on this niche, getting these sales mails delivered. And we got here through a pretty circuitous journey. This is my second email company in this space. My last one was a company called PHP We were a bit like MailChimp, delivering like billions of emails each month on behalf of our customers, so marketing mail. And I experienced a bunch of delivery issues there. We scaled up our network and long story short, ended up talking to a bunch of startup founders who depended on email as their primary channel to grow businesses. I know that email grows unicorns, spoken to a bunch of enterprises that used only email to get started in their first couple of years for sales, and saw a whole ton of pain there. So yeah, we built this new network just for sales delivery, and that's what we do.
Yeah. And so for folks that are a little bit newer to the space, like literally talked to an SDR yesterday whose VP had assigned him to help figure out deliverability. What is deliverability? Like, how would you describe it to Lavender? We're a big fan of writing emails at a fifth grade level. Like, how would you describe it to a niece or nephew?
Yeah, so for a message to be read or actioned at all, first of all, it's got to arrive. Like if it's not even delivered, it's like an SMS, right? If the message doesn't arrive, you've got no chance. You can optimize to your heart's content, but you're kind of optimizing the wrong thing. So it's like step zero. We kind of assume the email arrives at its destination, but actually a lot of times it doesn't. Or if it does, it might arrive in the wrong place. So, it maybe arrived, if we use the SMS analogy, in the wrong app or in a place that you didn't get a push notification. And then you're not going to see that it's even there. And with email, that happens all the time, maybe even the majority of email. This is what happens. So it ends up either in the junk folder or in the promotions tab, even though it's not a promotion, or it just never arrives at all. And that's kind of frustrating because you can't even see that. You don't know if it arrived. And if you put a lot of effort into your mail, it's kind of disheartening if you don't get that engagement you hope for.
Yeah. Oh man, there's like nothing worse than you spend a bunch of time on an email and then you send it and it just like bounces back. But I can't even imagine, like it's sort of like a next level frustration of you don't even know. You're just sort of in the dark, right? At least with like it bouncing, at least you get like the feedback loop, right? So one of the things you mentioned is showing up in the promotions folder. And my background, having spent some time in the marketing side of the house, I know when you use a tool like a MailChimp or even like a HubSpot, services like Gmail or Microsoft know what's sending the email. And so they automatically filter it into the promotions tab. Is that the main issue you see when folks are going to promotions or junk folders? Or is it more about like, maybe like what are the mechanics of like how an email is sent?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different signals that indicate to companies like Gmail and Microsoft, which I normally refer to as inbox providers, a bunch of different signals they look for. Definitely the sender address, like if it's, MailChimp.com or one of the domains they use, but a ton of other stuff too. So the length of the content, like images, links, if they're using tracking pixels, if they're using link tracking by rewriting all the links, as you've probably seen in mails that you get, and other stuff too, like even the sender address or the volume, the sending patterns. So, like if you're sending bulk marketing email, it tends to be like a big spike and then maybe quiet for a couple of days, and then you have another promotion, and then it goes out again. Whereas with office mail, like one-to-one mail, it's more of a drip feed during the day, right? And you're replying, you're sending new mail, so they can see a whole ton of stuff on their side, and they have a whole bunch of complex algorithms, and they change those pretty regularly, just like SEO rankings. So like understanding exactly what it takes to get into or out of the promotions tab on a given day is pretty hard, but there are like high level rules and heuristics that you can see both by looking at trends and by data that like both you and I have coming through our companies. We get to see quite a lot of data as to what works and what doesn't. And that gives us insight.
That's interesting, because like one of the things you're talking about is like the inbox providers tracking how you send email. Now I know like there's probably two main providers. Is that just because there's such a short amount of providers, they're able to track that?
There's loads more providers, actually. So we actually scanned every IP address, and we wanted to identify all the mail servers, and there's ways of doing that. We found there's 4 million email servers out there in the world, right? These are run by all kinds of organizations all over the world. We actually found most nations, I can't remember exactly, there was like the vast majority, at least 3/4 of countries on Earth are hosting email companies there of some kind. But most of the mailboxes are now concentrated in the hands of just a few companies. I think Gmail has like 80% market share of consumer mailboxes in North America. So those are the ones that are really important, depending on your target market. For enterprise companies, they tend to be more on Outlook with a relationship with Microsoft and such. Verizon's still pretty big. So like there's different data sources, and they will see, like with Gmail, you'll be seeing on a daily basis, like, if your company's domain that you're using for email, like, are you just sending one kind of email to Gmail? Are you sending multiple kinds? Is it spread throughout the day? So on their side, they have tons of data. On our side, we have different kinds of data. We can see obviously reply rate and open rate and stuff that you're familiar with, but from our side, like we have a bunch of different customers with different profiles. So we can see what mail is being delivered first time, what's being rejected, what the reasons might be for it being rejected, or if it's being delayed, which is very common. So often mail is intentionally delayed in order to see if you really want to send it, see if this mail is really worth it for you as the sender to get it through to the mailbox. And that's called gray listing.
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting because like I feel like there's just like so much noise in this space around deliverability, and you're providing a lot of clarity to that. With you have more conversations than I do when it comes to deliverability. At least I would hope at this point. I'm curious, like, because I hear so many different things about deliverability. What are the most like common misperceptions that you come across when it comes to deliverability? Like maybe mine, right? The idea that there's just two main mail providers is one.
Yeah. So not getting set up right to start with is, it goes a long way to whether you'll be like experiencing problems sooner or later. Some of the things to do when you're getting set up are separate different addresses, domains for sending from. So if you think about each email domain that you're using, so like, mycompany.com, it's an identity. And, much like you might, if you're an enterprise company, you might have different subsidiaries in different industries to like separate your activities. It's smart to do something similar with your addresses. So mycompany.com you might use for your office email, and mycompanymarketing.com or marketing.mycompany.com for your bulk mail. That helps to keep clean, what we call mail flows. So separate identities with Google, so that if you send too much, you trigger a spam filter in one place, you don't sort of burn your reputation and your ability to send for your office mail or for your invoices or notifications as well. That's important. There's quite a lot of technical, sorry?
That's super interesting, because I noticed one of the things when we scheduled the conversation, I think it said like invoices at Lightspeed or at Lightmeter, sorry. That sort of like piqued my interest. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Usually people just have their address attached to it. Is that sort of what you're talking about with like the mail flows?
Yeah, it's related, right? So we have a bunch of different domains and subdomains inside. Like when I'm thinking about whether to separate something onto a separate domain, I'm thinking like, what's the engagement profile I'm expecting from the kind of email we're sending? So like we have drip campaigns for onboarding new users on our side for our product. And these are users who should be quite engaged because the content is relevant, but maybe the address that they entered initially, maybe they, it's not an address they use often, or maybe we haven't fully verified the address yet. So we might still get some bounces. So it's like high quality, like traffic is high quality mail, like let's say that we expect high engagement rate, but less high quality than like some other kinds, like transactional mail, like when we send them a bill or an invoice, they really want to get that. So there should be no bounces at that point. And then there's office mail, which is like one-to-one, where I email you and say, hey, do you want a coffee or whatever? That's even higher. And so those would be 3 different mail flows for us because we're putting a lot of attention into it. But like at the high level, if, just to get started, it's good to simply separate your office mail, your one-to-one daily work mail from any bulk mail. And that will already go a long way towards like protecting your productivity, basically. Because if you send too much and it's all in the same domain, you can really cause problems and not end up being able to communicate with your customers, which one of our customers described as like an extinction level event for them, because they were like frozen out of being able to communicate with the people they needed to on a day-to-day basis because their growth team had been too busy.
You just hit on like such a story. So my co-founder and I, we were building our previous company, Sorter. We flew out to San Francisco on a fundraising trip. And when we landed, all the people they were talking to, everything that was going on just went quiet. We're like, what the heck is going on? And finally, about like day 2 of being there, we're panicking. We're like, what happened? Right? We figured out that somebody was like, oh, I found your email in my spam. And we're like, oh, crap.
And that can even happen when you're partway through a conversation, which is kind of crazy, right? Because you think Google would see, I've had like 3 emails replied to this person. That means I'm engaged with them. I recognize they're a human being and it's relevant, but then cut you off. And we hear that quite often, especially with startups during fundraising. Like if they're having tons of emails with investors, like, because we were in Y Combinator, so some other startups there, they've been through this process. And like, oh my God, this super high value message, like they made me an offer and I never got it, or my acceptance of the offer never went through and they went silent after I'd accepted the deal. What did I say? It's like, well, you didn't say anything because it never got through because you didn't separate the mail flows and probably your growth and sales team was sending tons of email on the same address. So yeah, it gets tricky, but it's fortunately pretty easy to fix. That's a good common thing to avoid. Don't do that.
Well, ours in that case you mentioned is easy to fix. It was something pretty simple. We didn't set up our DMARC. Which I could probably give like a terrible explanation of it, but as you are obviously more well-versed, when you think about, DKIMs, SPF, DMARC records, do you mind walking through a bit more of like the technical setup? Because I know it sort of basically tells Gmail as well as the other inbox that you are essentially who you are.
Yeah, totally. So it does a bunch of stuff like, at the most basic level, so these are DNS records or domain name system records that we're talking about, and they're just like at the infrastructure layer of the internet. Like when you send an email, some computer has to know where to send it, and these records tell them where to send it. And so just because you're like, you might be using Gmail for email, but you're still using your main company address. So it's like to startup.com. But it's being handled by Gmail. How does Gmail know to receive the message instead of someone else? It's because of a DNS record. And so they need to be set up right just for that basic layer. But these protocols are really old, like at least 40 years old, which is kind of crazy. And
that's wild.
There's a lot of it. Yeah, that's why it's like biggest network, had a lot of time to grow, first mover advantage, etc. But like lots of additional layers of verification have been added to thwart like abuse and spam and stuff over the years. So by this point, we've got like 3 main sort of DNS protocols, you might say, for email specifically. You mentioned DKIM. There's also SPF and DMARC. These need different entries. It's quite technical, but basically what they do is like you said, they allow the sender to trust that who they're sending the address to, like who the mail server is sending the address to, is really who they say they are. And they also do something really important, which is prevent other people pretending to be you, which is a very common problem. So it means that if there's the right DNS record, then you can't pretend to send email from PayPal. You can't pretend to be PayPal because there's like a key, a cryptographic key, and it can be checked, and they can really make sure that that you're who you say you are, and someone isn't pretending to be you, and vice versa. So you probably want someone more technical to help set that up. There's also guides online. You only need to do it once generally, and then you can forget about it, and that's great. But it's really important because Google and Microsoft, they care a lot about this. And actually just 2 weeks ago, Google seems to have got more strict on this even because they really care that you're set up right. And it's kind of a quality signal that if you've got these technical things set up right, like you're legit and you care about the mail that you're sending, basically.
Yeah. Curious, you mentioned sort of setting up those different workflows, those email flows. Does each of those different domains, does it matter? Well, I guess 2 questions here, right? One, does it matter if it's a subdomain versus a regular domain when we're talking about those email flows? But 2, do you need to have all those technical pieces set up for each of those email flows?
No and yes. So the first question shouldn't make a difference if it's a subdomain or a domain. They're treated as separate identities as far as Google is concerned, just like with cool. SEO. Yeah. So yep, that's fine. And like bigger brands tend to use subdomains rather than separate domains, but it varies. I just saw this morning, I got an email from, what was it now? I think it was like marketing.mailchimpapp.net. So all 3 parts of that are kind of curious because that's not their main domain. It's not, I mean, it's not .net is their main domain. So anyway, that's the first part. So no, that's fine. And the second part, yes, DNS needs to be set up correctly and separately for each of these things. But that gives you some freedom too, because it means, I mean, this enables you, for example, if you're using MailChimp for your newsletter, then you can have a subdomain, which is being handled completely by MailChimp and doesn't mess with your other kinds of email, your sales mail, your office mail. And so they're completely independent of each other.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because if any founder is listening to this, they probably have a portfolio of domains that they've bought over time, right? Whether they're just like right? Like you just have an idea, and like that's actually how lavender got its name. It was a literal shower thought where I was looking at a bottle of body wash and I was like, lavender's a cool name. Like maybe that like could be a cool like e-commerce store someday. And then, you know, we ended up down the line of building out lavender.
I spend way too much money on domains, and mostly they have never been used. I'm still looking for a use for mailpod.org and rocketmail.org. So if anyone's got ideas, like feel free.
I mean, rocketmail.org, that's solid. Those are good domains, man.
Thanks.
But yeah, thinking about that, right? Like you don't have to go out and buy a new domain every single time you want to create up a new email webflow, right? It can just be a subdomain, which is actually kind of nice because that means you only have to set up all the DNS stuff one time with the key domain, but also just make sure, I guess you would have to set up the subdomains within the.
You would need DNS. Additional DNS. Yeah. Which, again, it's flexibility and it's like extra overhead, but you only need to do it once for each subdomain. But it's good for branding, right? So like generally people, I mean, I don't know, like our customers, they generally don't use subdomains for mail that they expect people to be replying to. So like, you know, if you're wanting like replies to quotations or something, possibly like sales.mystartup.com is like not so good for branding, but you can still use it. But like for bulk stuff and transactional stuff, it's absolutely fine. Like hey.startup.com is good for newsletters and or, you know, whatever, ping. I've seen a bunch of different ones. Hello. Is common.
Well, and it's interesting because I've actually seen other upstart companies. I won't say they're startups. I'll say they're more of a scale up at the point that they're at, like filtering out new domains, which in my mind, I'm like, that's, yeah. At this point, how many different variations of domain can you buy for your certain company?
Yeah, I mean, some customers who come to us, they've already been through like 10 or so domains. Like, yeah, because I mean, if you're not doing sort of best practice, not doing some like basic stuff to keep the sending going smooth, then you'll burn through the domains one after another. And if you don't fix those issues, then you'll just keep burning through them. And you can do that, but it's a lot of hassle, right? Creating a domain, warming it up one by one, doing it again.
Yeah, but I think what's interesting here is one of the things that you're talking about is actually kind of like a myth that you've just busted out of the gate, which is you have to buy a new domain every time you want to spin up a new email channel. It could just be a subdomain,
Yep.
which makes it, if you're at your company right now and you're listening to this, like setting up the process for doing that, it's probably much easier than you thought it might be otherwise, right? Okay, so shifting gears. So like technical setup.
Yeah.
I think we've answered enough questions on that, right? Unless I'm missing something. Am I missing anything?
I would just say one more like piece of advice, like things that people commonly do wrong, is to send their sales mail like a very inconsistent volumes. So, especially if the startup's kind of small, maybe you don't have full-time salespeople, you're kind of fighting fires in this direction, and then you come back to sales outreach and you suddenly send like 300 messages in a day or whatever, like through Apollo or SalesLoft. That's not good. That's kind of a big red flag to the inbox providers, because that doesn't look anything like normal office kind of one-to-one mail. And the less you look like normal day-to-day email and the more you look like a big MailChimp campaign, the more likely they're going to junk you or block you altogether. So having something consistent is good. And most of the software allows you to do that, right? Most like Outreach.io and such, like you can set up a sequence and they can have like daily limits and things. It's a bit more fiddly, but it's worth doing to put in some kind of schedule so it doesn't kind of blast and then go silent and then blast. That's not good.
Yeah, that's actually sort of it's like your mind reader, because that was literally kind of what I was getting into in my next question, which is the notion of warming a domain. But what you're talking about is honestly the idea of like, you'll probably say like, yes, you need to warm a domain, but it's also like you need to keep it warm, at least lukewarm, and not like show strange odd spikes. Interesting. So domain warming. I guess first question, now that we talked about subdomains, do you need to warm a subdomain?
Absolutely. Just the same. So on the plus side, its reputation is isolated from the main domain or other subdomains, which is protection, which is good. But on the bad side, like on the negative side, that means it has no reputation to start with. You don't get any benefit from association with the other domain, and you don't get any disadvantage either. So you do have to warm it, and it will be treated as just another suspicious brand new domain registered. Like no reputation is the same as a bad reputation with lots of things, like with credit scores and with email reputations. So you've got to build up a reputation to prove you're legit before you use that subdomain.
Makes sense. So warming, how should someone go about it?
Well, there's a few different ways. Like if you're planning to send a pretty small amount of mail, like, if you're going to be sending maybe only 20 messages a day sales wise, once you're going fully, then you can do it manually. You can just use your own Gmail accounts, like send mail to Gmail accounts or people that you know with Gmail accounts, get them to open it, favorite it, that kind of thing. Interact with your email in a way that, from the new domain, of course, that makes it clear that it's valuable and it's relevant and people want it. If you're looking to send more, higher volumes, then basically you should be warming to a similar level to whatever you plan to send at. So from Google's perspective, they want to see like something credible, right? They want to see traffic that builds up over time. So it's not like a huge blast out of the void from nothing. And then they want to see people engaging with it to show that it's relevant and for that to stay that way. So warming traffic, it does this for you to start with. That's the idea of it. It gets you off the ground. It builds up the interaction. So you don't have to do it every day. And it saves you time. And you can build it up like different warming services. They offer more or less control. A lot of them won't let you control the volumes too specifically, like how much mail per day and how much interactions and stuff. A few of them will. Some of them support only one inbox provider. Like some of the larger ones, they focus exclusively on Gmail. And other ones will support like lots of different hosts. For them, they need to build support for each, you see. So at Lightmeter, we use our own warming service, and we use a bunch of third parties as well to cover as many bases as possible. If you're doing this yourself, then you should think about like if the people you're sending your sales mail to have a particular profile. So if you know already that, say, more than half of them are on Microsoft because they're enterprise customers, and that's your target, then you should pick a mail warming service that is good with Microsoft or does anything with Microsoft, because like a lot of them don't do Microsoft at all. And if you're only with Gmail because you're maybe you're more consumer, then you think, okay, 80% of American consumers are on Gmail, I'll just use one for Gmail. but you should be careful with the schedule and make sure that the volumes kind of smoothly, if you're looking at it as a graph, the graph should go up and then stay, or if it goes up, it should go up smoothly and it should go down smoothly. So no big jumps with the warming or with your traffic. And we take care of this. If you're doing it yourself, you need to do it yourself.
I was going to say, because like one of the things that comes to my mind is like, that sounds like a lot of work. Yeah. So I know like some services automate it, and you've kind of given me now new insight on like some services may automate it, but they may not automate it with the right providers. So I'm assuming at Lightmeter, y'all are approaching that.
Yep. Yeah, we support all the main inbox providers, Microsoft, Google, Verizon, a couple others. So yeah, until now, we haven't had any kind of customer. I mean, thing is, if you're focusing on such a tiny segment and they're all on like military domains, I guess you need a custom strategy. So do be mindful of who you're targeting. It's all about who you're targeting, right? Like, yeah. But generally speaking, you know, if you're sending a lot of sales mail, then you probably have a pretty diverse audience. So the big inbox providers cover the bases.
Yeah, but I mean, like folks in GovTech, like they have to come up with like a custom strategy for that. That's interesting.
That's actually a really interesting case, because like government agencies still often, especially outside of the US, but also in the US, they often still have pretty wacky email setups, not so well configured. So the weirdest problems I've ever seen have been sending to government agencies, actually, like all kinds of strange bounce messages and stuff. So that's a bit of a special case, and yeah, it's worth taking special action if that's the case.
Yeah. You bring up other industries. Like I think about financial services and like healthcare, where there's probably more security in place. Does that impact deliverability as well?
For sure. So those DNS records we spoke about earlier, they can be stricter or less strict. Like let's say when we're talking about impersonating somebody else, like that's what some of these technologies are designed to prevent. So some of them are super strict, and they'll say like, you know, it's not enough that you've got like level 3. I mean, DMARC policy. You need like you need to comply with more checks, basically. There's also some stuff around IPv4 versus IPv6. Like these are different protocols. Let's just say, yeah, like if you know that you're sending to really privacy-aware organizations, like especially banks, if this is a key segment for you, and I'm talking about like maybe more than 10% of your targets, your prospects are in that sector, then it's worth going the extra mile and like adding more security on the DMARC policy side. This is one of those DNS records we're talking about, to make sure like you're not just meeting the minimum requirements, because what Google and Microsoft require is much less than what some of those other organizations will require. They'll want more reassurance before they'll let your email into their network, and you may well not get a bounce. So you can expect lower delivery rates, poorer deliverability, until you've gone the extra mile with especially the DMARC records. Okay.
Now back sort of like to the notion of myths. So they let you in the network. Let's just assume.
They're in the walls.
There's a lot of conversation in the sales sphere that if you kick off a conversation, like your first cold note has a link or a message in it, or not a message. Well, I guess hopefully it has a message. It would be awkward if it didn't, but it has a link or like an image or a video file, something like that. Those things are going to be viewed as more suspicious. And so the common recommendation is that you should not include any links or any imagery or, you know, extra stuff outside of just plain text in a first touch. Does that matter? Is that a thing?
Kind of. So you have good expertise here as well, and I'm interested to hear your experience. But from my side, the domain reputation trumps those like very fine-grained signals in my experience. So if you've got a solid track record of being engaging and relevant, then you shouldn't need to worry about including links in the first message. Neither images really, but
it's a myth.
Not completely a myth, right? So if you haven't got such a great reputation, if you've been sending high volume, you know, sales mail, and your engagement rate hasn't been so high. So let's say you're more of an average sales emailer rather than like a super high performing sales emailer, then yeah, like the weighting of those black box algorithms in Gmail, they're going to pay more attention to that stuff. So that being said, yeah, like the more like, so long as it looks like the heuristic we use is so long as it looks like an email which comes from a real person and is like an interpersonal message, then you should be okay. So do you include do you go to the trouble of like double clicking and inserting like hyperlinks on lots of individual words in emails when you're emailing like somebody manually in whatever Gmail or whatever? Probably not. I mean, I don't bother. I just put the link into space. Right. I mean, do you embed HTML images and make the text flow around it? No. So that's probably, not a good thing to do.
Well, Sam, that actually brings up an interesting point. So like if I hyperlink the text versus just have the like hyperlink visualized out there, does it view the just hyperlink out there more favorably?
I think it makes humans more suspicious personally, because like if I see emails like that, which have got lots of hyperlinks or even like two, I think, it looks more like a sales mail. So it serves two purposes, both for humans and for the algorithms. I mean, the algorithms change. And like I said, the overall, like the strongest signal for Google is if people are engaging with your email. And that's why the domain reputation trumps this stuff and the engagement track record that you have. But if you haven't got such a solid track record, then yes, pay attention. And no, I can't give like very specifics on individual like lengths of words or keywords and stuff, because they change pretty often. You can find lots of lists of like bad words on the internet, and some of them are kind of ridiculous and they change pretty often. And Google isn't telling anybody what those are, except maybe over drinks in Silicon Valley. So it's better to optimize for stuff which is, like more sustainable for a policy. When you're thinking, how should I be writing content? How should I be training my sales team to write their content? Like banning individual words is less good. Being super relevant with your targeting and your content, and writing content that looks like it's written by a human, which is, I know it sounds obvious, but I find myself, it's so easy to slip into, like you were talking about 5th grade versus 10th grade reading level earlier. It's so easy to slip into like formal, long-winded, multi-paragraph things with hyperlinks and PS, and that's just not how, like another heuristic I use, I try and be more and more like WhatsApp messaging, right? It's what people are used to. And ideally split like different themes into different messages. So often I'll split like a 3-paragraph email into 2 different emails. It's just good for all kinds of things.
Yeah, you've kind of blown my mind here with the idea that it doesn't actually matter if you put a link or a visual in that first touch. So I kind of want to dig into that a little bit more, because like most folks have no idea what their domain reputation is. If you do have that bad reputation and it's going to potentially be viewed more negatively, I imagine most sales reps listening to this are going to be like, yeah, I don't probably know. And like, you should totally hit up Sam because his company will tell you. But say you don't know and you're just sitting in the void of not being aware of where you're at. So the next thing you would say is like, okay, I shouldn't include those links or those images in the first touch. Now, if it's a follow-up to that original email and you're in thread and you're following up to that original note, is it viewed more favorably? Like, does it make a difference if I add links in my 3rd email to basically myself at that point within that like thread, and like that's when I add a link, or I add an image in that 3rd touch or a video there, as opposed to in that first touch? Does that?
Absolutely, because the inbox provider's got a very strong signal, which is a reply, right? That reply, as I said before, it's not a catch-all, unfortunately, because sometimes messages do get junked even during the thread. But they shouldn't.
Well, what's interesting about that would be it would be just a reply to myself. I'm just replying to myself within your inbox.
I see, a follow-up. I thought you meant if it was in reply to them. Okay, so they haven't got that signal. I don't have data on that specifically as to whether you can include a link in the 2nd or 3rd follow-up and affect deliverability. That speaks to your wider strategy, right? So some of our customers, they have a policy of never sending follow-ups because they don't want to get junked, and they might be more likely to get clicked as this is spam from the recipient if they send a follow-up. But that's not standard, right? I also send follow-ups because, not replying doesn't mean no interest. It might mean I'm busy today or what have you. So I would say you've got to experiment. And these policies are very different with the inbox providers too. So Microsoft has, got different black boxes to Google. They don't share the same algorithms. And they change from time to time. So you got to see how it goes. But there are some other things you can do. Like if you've got a problem, like if you're at the stage where you've got a really low like engagement rate and you don't think it's the content, like as in you think that if a human read it, it should be relevant because you've carefully segmented your market and you've got a value proposition that you've tested. And, with people who are like the person you're sending to, like this is stuff to build up relevance before you send out a blast and risk your reputation of the domain on the first shot. Then I'd recommend that you turn off pixel tracking if you've got it already enabled, at least for a test. Also that you turn off link tracking, which is separate. And like maybe check your lists. These like some basic housekeeping things to do to, check for other things that you could be doing, which are sending bad signals to these inbox providers. And consider...
You're kicking off a few questions here for me.
Sure.
One being link tracking. So is that because the link is like going to one domain and then getting immediately forwarded?
Yeah. And like a lot of so if you're using like, if we think of some of the traditional ESPs like SendGrid or MailChimp, they will build in link tracking and the links that they use will usually be on their domain. And that's a very so if an email includes, and the email has the link has a particular format just for these rewritten links. So it's not like mailchimp.com/your URL. It's very specific to the system they use. I can't remember what but it'll be something like link.mailchimp.com/li blah blah, and that's recognizable, right? That can be picked up by Google, Microsoft, and it is. So that's a sign that even if other aspects of the email don't look like bulk, that you're using a link rewriting system from a bulk emailing service or system. Or this is also true for Apollo. So Apollo does link rewriting using their own standard format of links. That's recognized. And instead of doing that, like if you want an additional signal, and I can understand if you do, right, because reply write isn't everything, you can use another service like DocSend or another one of these like tracking services for documents, like depending on what you're sending. Those don't have the same effect because they don't indicate whether it's bulk or personal. I mean, I use those services for one-to-one email as well for tracking links.
It makes sense because DocSend's just hosting the document. So it's just going to that immediate domain. And then you see, okay, there's a document and you can track what the person does on that page.
Yeah. It'd be like a Dropbox link. It doesn't say this is a link, this is a bulk message, or this is coming from a CRM or a sales mail automation system in the same way that one of those other, like the standard link tracking systems do when you have that turned on in this software.
Yeah. The other thing that's interesting to me is like this idea of pixel tracking, because I feel like it's going more and more out of style with like Apple Mail announcing that they're going to stop like allowing you to track opens essentially. Microsoft's been doing this for some time now. The only potential use case that I really see for it right now is, getting a measurement of deliverability. Does your open rate all of a sudden fall off, right? But obviously there's services like y'all's, which would be a much more effective way of tracking that. So it sounds like we should be just ditching open tracking as a signal altogether.
Yeah, I mean, it does harm. And depending on who you're targeting and where their email is hosted, it might not do you any good, because if you're sending a lot to Gmail or other services which are either caching or blocking these pixels, then it's not going to tell you useful information, but it's going to tell them information which they'll use against you. So like my advice is if you have a problem, like if you think that deliverability could be like negatively impacting what you're doing and you're not happy with your engagement rate and it's not the content, then definitely turn it off as part of what your reaction to that, like your strategy to drive up deliverability. And then, you may see an improvement within a couple of days. You may not, but if it's not telling you much information anyway, then why keep it on?
Yeah, that's interesting. So one of the things that I kind of hear from what you just said is that if you make the right changes, things improve pretty quickly. Is that?
Yeah, they can. Again, so long as you're sending like fairly consistently. So if you make these changes, but then you send nothing for a week, and then it's like, okay, you've got new enthusiasm. It's a Monday. I'm going to turn on my campaigns again and you send like 200 having sent nothing for a week, then it's still going to suck. So there's a bunch of factors that you need to take care of. But yes, the reputation should improve quickly, especially if you're getting engagement. So like, even if you're getting a percentage of your mail going to junk or promotions tab, if the mail that's getting through is being engaged with because the content's right and because it's targeted, then that's a strong signal. And that usually will have an impact, within a few days. Like, depends on how much, I think you actually said originally to me in our previous call about credit score as a concept for domain reputation. Mm-hmm. So if you've got like a year of having, unpaid debts, then it's going to take you longer to fix your credit score, right? But if you've just like sent too much mail for 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks or a month, I'd hope to be able to recover the reputation with Google within a couple of weeks using a warming service with a smooth ramp up and good engagement. Then you should be able to recover that domain. But it depends very much on the particular history of the domain.
That's helpful. And like if the domain is just sort of hosed, right, is your best bet to either launch a new subdomain or should you just go out and buy a new domain altogether?
Either. Like they're practically the same as far as the reputation is concerned with Google. Yes. They're both new. So whichever has the best marketing impact for you and brand recognition.
Okay. I've got a couple more questions that I thought of for this conversation. And it kind of ties back to how a lot of sales teams operate and account strategy, as well as like how sales teams try to scale, right? So one of them is around content variance. So if you send a lot of the same email, I imagine like people's engagement with that exact same text over and over again is probably more important than anything. But assuming all things hold true, right? Say we've got 50% of emails are open, 10% are responded to, but one team is sending the exact same thing over and over, and the other team is like varying it up all the time. Does that have an impact on deliverability?
Yes, we've seen that have an impact with Gmail specifically. So sending the same content we normally recommend changing it up every week, but let's say, around that period, if you send exactly the same content, so no personalization other than say the name, then we've seen that harm, or at least with no other changes, we've seen open rates decrease as a result of that. So I would recommend changing it up. It doesn't take much to personalize it. Like most software has placeholders that you can personalize little bits with, like little snippets, without having to manually write each.
Okay, so even just like changing the first name is enough for that, like to get
more, but you can use placeholders for changing other things too, right? Like the name of their business or when you last contacted them, or I don't know how Google does it, whether it's a percentage of the text change or I don't know how they calculate that, but sure, as much change as possible. If you're changing a common thing to do is, your sales reps will know is just to change the first line if you can personalize it kind of at all. But if you've got standard templates and you're working, just try and chop them up a bit, like every week or so. And that shouldn't be too difficult to do, right? Like word order and such. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and that's something I'm pretty passionate about, which is like, one, you should definitely be personalizing your outbound because, the person on the other end gets a ton of email all the time. And so they're probably sitting there looking at it and saying to themselves like, okay, here's another automated message, even if it is like perfectly relevant, which of course we've built software that can help with that. But the other thing that I always have been pushing teams to do is update your templates, continue to test and iterate, which is kind of getting at that. If you have just good email practice of iterating, testing new copy, trying different things on repeat, as well as personalization, right? You're going to find yourself having a higher reputation score, holding, engagement the same.
Yeah. And it's not so difficult to come up with stuff to add, I find, like what's going on with your business this week? Have you signed any like cool new customers, or is there a promotion, or do you have a new partnership? Is there something coming next week? You can add that like to the end of the copy of the email, maybe one sentence or two, and it should work across templates, right? So it shouldn't be that difficult to introduce some freshness week over week to the copy.
Yep. Okay. This is cool. The other question I had, is like, I'm going after an account and there's multiple persona within that account that I could be speaking with. If I email them all around the same time, does that matter? Or let's assume that I'm sending a different message to each of them. I'm just going to assume on paper, if I send the same message to 3 people at the same company at the same time, they're going to assume it's like a phishing note. If I send 3 different messages to people at the same company at the same time, does that matter?
Nope. As far as delivery is concerned, that shouldn't matter at all.
Really? Interesting. If it's the same message, does it?
As long as you've got enough variation in the message more generally, and like we're talking about a big inbox provider, like if they're hosting their own email, which is not so common these days, but if they were and they got 3, within a very short time frame, then maybe, but probably not. Like generally speaking, should be fine. If you're talking about like 50 to people in the same organization, yeah, that might get more spammy as far as the big inbox providers filters are concerned. But no, in this case, it should be just fine.
But it also makes you recognize, like, say you've got a series of onboarding emails going out and you onboard a team of 50, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they all start getting the same message. Yeah. Is that a potential risk?
Well, what kind of content are we talking, and what kind of engagement profile are you expecting? Because if it's something they need to action, like if it's activate your email address, that's transactional email, which should be on a different domain and different mail flow, ideally.
Yes.
And they will be engaging with it because they need that information. So that should also be just fine, but for different reasons, because you can expect super high engagement. If it's sales and you send to lots of people, maybe one of them bounces, maybe nobody replies to the first shot, and so it's a different profile. But if it's 50 and it's transactional, also fine.
Oh man, this has been super informative, man. I feel like, because like I get questions asked about this all the time, and like I feel like there's just so much myth out there. I feel like you've shown a really strong light on what's pretty important out there. Your reputation matters, setting up different workflows to protect, warming. I'm curious, like what other advice are we missing out on? If there's like, maybe it's just like if you're concerned about your deliverability, what are the top 5 things that they need to be doing?
Yeah, like if you've got a problem, or if you just want to do it right the first time.
Wow. Yeah, maybe let's start with if you have a problem, because I feel like most folks out there probably started. And so let's go with if you haven't started yet. Because if you haven't started, then I would assume you'd need to go warm up your domain and separate out your workflows. So you're warming up each of your subdomains, and then just start sending quality stuff. But say you have a problem.
If you know why you have a problem, and you kind of, you understand what you did wrong, basically, then you should know how bad it is. And if it's bad, get a new domain, warm it up at least a week, depending on which service, and start by sending to who you expect to be like more engaged prospects when you do start. If you're not sure what you did wrong, or that you did something really wrong, like you were sending far too much for like 2 months, or you got junk junk reports and it, then sorry, that's the other case. I'm tying myself in knots here. Like basically, if you're in a good position, then fix your old domain. If you're in a bad position, get a new domain. Turn off pixel tracking, turn off link tracking. Of course, the content and the engagement is always important. So use Lavender, or just put more effort into your value prop to make sure what you're sending is good one way or another. And ideally, try it with a small audience first. Maybe try it with 20 prospects rather than 100 to see if it lands at all. Because you only want to scale up something that you're confident is going to be effective. There's no point. This is something definitely to avoid. When you have a problem, do not 10x your volume and expect it to 10x the tiny, sales rate, conversion rate that you've got. That will cause you more problems, and you might not even get that existing percentage continue if you do that. So it's a time to pause and take stock.
Oh, well, Sam, this was great, man. If I want to send people to connect with you, where should they go? How should they get a hold of you?
Getlightmeter.com is our website. Book a meeting there. You can do it directly with one of my team. You can reach out to me directly as well. I'm Sam at getlightmeter.com. And I mean, I'm on a bunch of different channels. It's been wonderful talking to you today, Will. I'm on LinkedIn
I'm glad
too.
we got to do this.
Yeah, me too. It's fun talking about email. It's really so important for building companies up, critical channel, and I love helping companies grow, just like you.
Awesome. Well, cool. Everybody get a hold of Sam. I know email deliverability is a hot topic right now. I think Google rolled out some sort of update because I've seen it popping up in conversation all over the place. So be sure to hit up Sam, be sure to hit up Lightmeter, because this is, listen, we can't help you if your email doesn't deliver. So this is necessary stuff for everybody to know and to start to.
If you're using us to deliver content that's not relevant, then there's a limit to how much we can help you too. So stick with us and you'll get sales. Thanks a lot, Will.
Awesome. Thanks.
Bye for now.